So every single time that you have a thought, your brain actually produces chemicals that go down to your body so that you can feel what you're thinking. So if you get excited about something or you get nervous about something, we've all had that like butterfly feeling in our stomach, right? When we get nervous when something's happening. And what's happening is you're producing specific chemicals that are released within your digestive system that's communicating that emotion, so that each time that you have a thought, it's going to have a specific mirror reflection inside your gut. So when someone has like an IBS flare-up or they have, say, constipation, it's not just this physical struggle that they have.
Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, the best place to shop for unique clothing, spiritual handcrafted jewelry, healing gemstones, and fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now, here's your host, Brett Larkin.
Hi, Savannah family. Welcome back to the show. Today is all about our brains and our guts and how they are linked together to create optimum health. We're talking to Teri Mosey, Ph.D., an international speaker, a wellness consultant, and the author of The Hidden Messages in Food. Teri has earned a bachelor's degree in biochemistry, a master's degree in exercise physiology, a doctorate in holistic nutrition, and she's also a graduate of culinary studies. So she really knows her stuff. Using a truly holistic approach, Teri's intention is to inspire, educate, and support others towards becoming the best version of themselves using the model of the healthy, happy ecosystem, which we're gonna learn more about today. Like an ecosystem, everything in your body is linked, and when one part is out of balance, the entire system is affected. So what happens to your mood and mental health when your gut is out of balance? We are gonna find out today. What do we do to fix that? We're gonna talk a lot about the microbiome and how to know if yours is healthy. We're gonna also talk about what's the difference between prebiotics and probiotics. That's always confused me. Before we dive into this episode, I just wanna remind you how you can support the show. Leave a rating or review here on iTunes, even if iTunes isn't how you normally listen to the show. At savannahspirit.com/review, we outline exactly how to do that. The other big way you can make a difference is to show your love and your support by making a purchase on savannahspirit.com, an online shop for yoga clothing, healing jewelry, and unique spiritual fair trade gifts. Today, I'm highlighting this amazing book on their site. It's the complete book of Ayurvedic home remedies by Vasant Lad, and a lot of experts that we've had on the show have recommended this book. If you're like me, you're probably fascinated by Ayurveda and the different doshas and how to balance your body and your mind. So if you love this episode, I highly recommend you buy this book and start learning about your own dosha. Remember to use that coupon code TAKE25 for $25 off anything at Savannah Spirit's online store. And now let's dive into today's episode. Teri, thank you so much for being here and coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
I'm excited for our episode today because you're going to be telling us about the link between the brain and the gut, which is something that I feel like is trending now. This is like a concept that people are interested in now. How did you get interested in this work?
Well, I started off with a very heavy science background, and just over my own progressions and stuff, I was introduced to Eastern teachings. So brought in Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic practices. And as I started doing that, we started to see how the body is more of a holistic design. And as all the research has been changing in the different disciplines, they're starting to realize that the brain and gut, as far as any other system that's in the body, is actually connected. And that's where we're starting to find these different solutions for well-being by looking at how everything is in relationship to one another. So it started off with just pure science and then brings us into the space of looking at the world as a more holistic concept. And that's where we're getting the brain-gut research that's happening right now.
And tell listeners a little bit about you, your background, and how you studied all this, and then why you got interested in the sort of the other teachings, as you said, like the Chinese medicine and things like that.
I've always been in the health and wellness industry for about 22 years now, and I have some degrees in biochemistry and exercise physiology. So I used to work with clients and do some teaching relative just to basic, straightforward biochemistry, anatomy, physiology kind of things, and even nutrition. And what happened is over time, you just start to learn more because research is just really diving into different aspects of well-being and what we can do to help people who have long-term diseases. So as I started to just go through my process of being in my career, I also ended up getting sick myself. And when I did, Western medicine couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. So I ended up going outside of mainstream thinking and was introduced to Eastern teachings. And that's when I was introduced to traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda's chakra systems, and just looking at life from a more holistic perspective, recognizing that everything is connected, mind, body, and soul. And it just opened up a whole nother avenue to me when you start to not just talk physical, but you start to talk energy. So it was a little bit of a combination of career and then my own kind of health crisis that brought me here today.
I feel like I hear that from so many of the guests who come on the show, is that they ended up having a crisis themselves and they weren't able to heal using traditional modalities, and that's what really sparked their interest and then their own self-healing that they're then sharing with others. And I love that so much. So break it down for people who are skeptical. Like, how and why are the brain and gut connected? Because obviously they're kind of far apart. When I have my hand on below my navel right now, or like around my belly, and I have a hand on my head, and they seem very far apart. And what is this connection, and why should we be interested in it if we're someone who's really wanting to hack and optimize our life using yoga and meditation? Like, why is this connection in particular so interesting?
Well, what's interesting about it is that we're just finding out that, first of all, that our brain is not only hanging out in our head, that we have brain cells throughout our entire body. So we're starting to learn that it's not just your neocortex, there's aspects of your brain everywhere. We're also finding out that the gut itself actually has its own brain. It has its own nervous system. It's called the enteric nervous system. And your gut's brain has actually over 100 million neurons, brain cells. So that's more than what's running up and down your spine. And one of the things that we're learning about this is that gut brain actually operates independently of your neocortex or head brain. So it doesn't need to be told what to do. It actually is constantly telling the brain more than the brain is telling the gut. So we're learning that the signaling, which happens through nerves as well as the bloodstream, so there's still a chemical and neurological aspect as to how they communicate, but that the gut by itself does so many other things besides digesting our food. So we have this idea of, okay, the gut does this, our heart does this, our brain does that. And what we're learning when we start to really look at the way everything works inside the body from a holistic perspective is that they're all blended together. So, and what we're seeing is that our nervous system in our gut actually helps to regulate our immunity. It coordinates different neurotransmitter and hormone secretions. That's the connection to the brain. And so it impacts our cognitive function. So you may have heard of the hormone serotonin. It's our master happiness molecule. And 90% of it actually is produced inside your gut. It has nothing to do with your neocortex brain.
So this is so fascinating, but I think it's also overwhelming for people to think about. It's like, oh, my brain lives in my whole body. And what does that really mean? And I think this is so helpful that you're breaking it down, talking about the neurotransmitters and all of that. But let's walk through like maybe a practical scenario to make sure that we all get this idea. So what's an example of a signal that my gut would send to my brain? Like, let's say, for example, I have digestive issues, okay? Like maybe I have IBS or I'm having trouble digesting my food, or a leaky gut, something like that. So there's stagnation in, like the lower three chakras, there's stagnation in my digestive tract. What then is happening inside the body scientifically that's affecting how serotonin is produced or how it's talking to the brain? Can you kind of walk us through step by step?
So every single time that you have a thought, your brain actually produces chemicals that go down to your body so that you can feel what you're thinking. So if you get excited about something or you get nervous about something, we've all had that like butterfly feeling in our stomach, right? When we get nervous when something's happening. And what's happening is you're producing specific chemicals that are released within your digestive system that's communicating that emotion. So that each time that you have a thought, it's going to have a specific mirror reflection inside your gut. So when someone has like an IBS flare-up or they have, say, constipation, it's not just this physical struggle that they have. So when we talk about constipation, sure, we can say that you haven't had enough fiber and water in your diet, so your dietary tract is a little slow. Yes, but constipation is also linked to the emotion of sadness and the inability to let go. So there's specific emotions that are tied to different bodily responses that we now understand, to the point that when you're constipated, you're actually going to release less of that serotonin, that happiness molecule. And we all know when you don't feel good in your digestive system, right, you really don't feel well. You're kind of moody, you're sluggish. It impacts your brain. So there's this cycle of how both of them interact with each other. Does that make sense?
It does. And it seems very obvious. I mean, I think at a high level, it's like, yes, this makes sense. But let's go back down into the science of it, because I think it's like, if I, for example, so let's go with constipation, right? So I'm feeling constipated, but if just thinking I let go or I release, or just like having specific types of thoughts, like, is that really going to be enough to relieve my physical symptoms? Or do I need to go farther, like maybe do tapping or acupuncture? Or do you get my question? Like, is it enough to just think certain types of thoughts, or do we need to actually invite in certain modalities, like Chinese medicine, for example?
Well, it just depends on the severity of the constipation, right? So if you're just once in a while you get constipated, then it literally is a change in your state of mind and your consciousness that will let that go. But if you're somebody who has struggled with constipation for extended periods of time, so chronic constipation, what that does is that alters the release of different hormones in your body over time, and that your stagnation is going to be stronger. So yes, acupuncture can then be of an assistance. Does that make sense? So it depends on the severity of those ailments that you're experiencing. But it all goes back to your consciousness and goes back to your mind.
And then next question, Teri, say I take some kind of either over-the-counter or maybe even a prescription drug to relieve my symptom, right, that we're talking about. What's the effect then on the body?
That's a good question, because sometimes you do reach out to external uses if the discomfort is too long, and that's when the concern there is how it impacts our microbiome. So we know so much about what's happening inside our gut right now and our friendly bacteria. So you may have heard like prebiotics, take probiotics, and that kind of thing. And with the human microbiome project that's happening right now, we know that we have over like 4 pounds of bacteria in our stomach. And that bacteria is responsible for releasing specific brain chemicals like serotonin, dopamine, gamma, and all these things allow you to be calm, to allow you to be able to cope with stress, allow you to think clearly. So when we start to take external drugs or do different things to kind of quick fix our digestive issues, we're also altering the way that our body is manufacturing all those chemicals that really impact our mind.
Which sounds scary or potentially dangerous.
But yes, it is, because we're starting to realize the importance of our friendly bacteria, because it plays roles in our immunity, whether we can detox, whether you can take weight off and keep it off. So a lot of people who struggle with their metabolism usually have struggles with their microbiome on a more scientific level.
And this word microbiome is a word that I think I've heard about only in the past 5 years, right? So can you explain what it is for listeners who maybe aren't familiar with that term?
Sure. So the microbiome is basically bacteria. So we're talking about the fact that we have over 100 trillion bacteria all over our bodies. So we've gotten into that craze of doing all this like antibacterial soaps and stuff like that, when the reality is we are a big ecosystem, and your ecosystem and your bacteria that you have in your body is actually like having a unique fingerprint. It's all you. And that specific aspect of you is what interacts with your immune system, is what keeps you healthy. It impacts your mood, your memory, and it allows you to be able to cope with or without stress. So, it's basically just your bacteria. We are an ecosystem. We're not just a human being.
And how does it get out of balance? I mean, is it something that, obviously breast milk is hugely important these days, right? And I was told that I should breastfeed my baby in large part because it's getting his digestive tract and, cultivating the seeds of what that microbiome will be, right? But then if you can, but as you grow up, right, it's like, it's natural that biome is going to eventually get out of balance. Or if we eat a perfect diet, or if we do a certain type of thing, can that biome stay in balance? Do you understand what I'm asking? Like, is it inevitable that it's just going to go off balance at some point?
It's not inevitable, but understand that life is like a roller coaster. So it's not about being perfect about it. But yes, the way that we eat, the way that we sleep, how we manage our state of mind and our mood all impact whether our bacteria in our stomach are going to be happy or not.
And so, Teri, just to make sure I understand this right, it's not just the gut informing the brain. It's also like if I'm depressed or unhappy or thinking negative thoughts, even if I'm eating kimchi and like all the perfect things for my microbiome, it's still not going to be in the state of balance we need it to be if my mind is not in the right place. Does that make sense? Okay, so it's not just about food when we're talking about balancing the microbiome.
No, it's not just about food. Food is one action you can take, but it also has a lot to do with your mindset. And that's why I would recommend shifting your food so that there's some prebiotic food always in your diet, as well as practicing a daily meditation.
Can you give us some examples of prebiotic foods for the listeners?
Sure. Garlic, red onions.
Raw or cooked? Sorry, I have to interrupt you.
So garlic and red onions are going to be raw.
Okay.
Bananas, dandelion greens, those are going to be prebiotics. Those are the main favorite foods of our bacteria in our stomach. But most vegetables have some form of prebiotic in it. Those are just more concentrated. And then you can also do a more fermented food. So kimchi, as you just mentioned, a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar, tempeh, or some good old raw pasteurized sauerkraut, right? And now like a lot of people doing fermented veggies.
And Teri, does it matter what time of day or when we're eating these things, or just like any time is good?
It doesn't matter, whatever works for you. Some people will wake up in the morning and take their 2 forkfuls of sauerkraut as they start their day as if it's their medicine. Sometimes that's not so palatable at 7 a.m. But you can also, at any time that it works for you, just consistently doing it each day.
Okay, great. So it's really about the consistency that matters.
Exactly.
And then just because we're talking about it, and I think people listening might be curious, and I know I am, can you just explain for folks the difference between prebiotic and probiotic? Because of course, when we go to the supermarket or in the vitamin store, we just see probiotics everywhere. So what's the difference between these two things, and what should we as yogis be really focused on?
Yeah. So prebiotics are foods that your friendly bacteria can eat to stay healthy. So you already have that bacteria in your stomach and you want to keep them happy. That's what you want them to eat. That's a prebiotic.
So it's like food for the good bacteria that we already have.
Good bacteria. Exactly.
Okay.
It's their favorite foods. They love bananas and garlic.
Yeah. Okay. I'm like thinking of like putting like fish food in the fish tank. It's like we got to feed them first. Okay. Got it.
Where a probiotic is already fermented, so which means it already has bacteria in it. So you're going to be adding bacteria to your digestive system.
Okay, interesting. And based on what you've told us about the microbiome, is that necessarily a good idea for everyone to do, or?
I would recommend a mixture of both, but having a higher presence of prebiotic, so having a more plant-based diet, and then having some probiotic, but don't get crazy. So now there's a lot of advertisements about kimchi and all the different types of kombucha drinks and stuff like that. And it's been so marketed now to the point that it's excess. You do want to take in a little probiotic because it allows for there to be a more diverse strain of bacteria inside your gut. And that's what's going to be helpful as well. It's not just how much bacteria you have, it's how diverse that bacteria is.
So the probiotics, like introducing new fish or like new little sea creatures into the aquarium with my analogy.
That's exactly it. But you only want to do a little. So it literally is a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar a day. That's it.
Got it.
Don't go chugging the bottle.
And what are your thoughts on like taking probiotics as pills, like the capsules that we see in the stores with the different strains and all of that?
I'm not an advocate of it as much as I'm going to kind of be a supporter of you having a more overall dietary pattern that supports this. If you end up traveling and end up getting traveler's diarrhea, then taking that probiotic, which that's how it was created and designed for 5 days is awesome. But if you're just living on it because you're using it as a blanket to not eat well and not take care of yourself in other aspects, that's when it becomes a concern.
Got it. That makes sense. And then, I remember from talking to other experts on the show that this idea that, and I don't know if you're familiar with Ayurveda, I'm sure you are, but that it's really about not just what we're eating, but can we actually digest it, right? So I think another expert was telling me at some point, like, you can take all these super expensive probiotics, but if your gut lining, isn't healthy, they're just going to flush right through your system. You're not going to be properly absorbing the strains in the probiotic, and maybe a lot of the great kale and all these rich foods that you're eating, rich in nutrients, you're not absorbing the nutrients if your microbiome is all out of whack. Is that all?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And that's why it's very deceiving when it comes to marketing and stuff. It's like, oh, I'm eating all these great foods, but it's not just what food that you're eating. It's who is eating and what are all the variables of who they are. It's how they're able to digest food, what their immunity is like, what their microbiome is like. All of that determines whether you can take the food in, actually break it down and absorb and assimilate it. There's a difference between what you stick in your mouth and what actually gets inside you.
And I think for a lot of us, that's where the mystery lies, right? So what do you tell folks, or when you're working with your clients, like, how do we know if our microbiome is healthy? I mean, if we're having regular bowel movements, if we feel pretty good, is it sort of safe to assume things are okay? Or what do you tell folks?
Absolutely, that you should have regular bowel movements, that you are able to sleep well, that you're not so, what's the word I want to use? Anxious or have trouble with coping. So if you find you're very impulsive and you get very reactive to people or things that go out of place and stuff like that, that's a huge red flag.
Got it. So even if, your digestion and your bowel movements and everything are regular, if you're impulsive, crazy, hot temper, super stressed out, chances are, because of this mind-gut connection that you're talking about, chances are that actually your biome could be out of balance.
Correct, because your microbiome actually manufactures those chemicals that calm you and keep your coping skills steady.
Interesting. So someone who has a microbiome that's in balance, they shouldn't be like having road rage, and they shouldn't be the person screaming at the waiter at the restaurant. Is that true? Like, basically?
Well, I mean, it's not, you still carry a whole person with you, right? That comes with a soul and a consciousness.
Yes,
so you have to make decisions, but we will be less impulsive and less reactive when our microbiome is happier.
So interesting. Now, I know the other thing you really mentioned, the tip you gave to people, was to meditate, right? That was the other thing you said. And then I dove into the details of the food, but I'd love to dive now into the details of the meditative aspect. So what's your suggestion for listeners there?
My suggestion would be, I know this sounds intense for many people, but it needs to be every day. And it doesn't matter if it's 5 minutes to start with. But it's the same thing as our nutrition. What we're finding when we look at meditation and how it impacts us, it's the consistency, because that's what allows our body to shift. It allows our genes to express differently and for us to manifest a different state of mind. So it's always about consistency. So I would recommend a daily meditation, and the best time to do it is when you wake up. So do not grab your phone. People are still laying in bed and they're feeling around for their cell phone. Like, let me check my emails. It would be the first thing in the morning to kind of just zone in and bring yourself back to the most present space you can be. And that's what allows you to go about your day and respond differently, as well as start to heal other aspects of yourself.
Yeah, that's a great tip. I mean, for so many of us, our phone is our alarm clock. So it just ends up being the first thing that we're holding and we're dealing with. Teri, what is your meditation practice like? I always like to ask guests when they come on the show, are you doing a certain type of meditation or a certain kind of yoga or well-being practice that you do at the beginning or end of the day? And what does that look like for you?
Yeah. So over the years, I have kind of developed many different meditative practices. So I will pick and choose a few each day, depending on what's happening for me. But I do always start my day with a seated meditation in the morning. I also do walking meditations. So I'll take myself out to the park and do a small walking meditation. And another type of meditation, which I call the wandering meditation, is I take myself for city walks where you can keep yourself very present and mindful, but yet you're still acting in our lives. And I think that's one of the main things that has helped impact me, is to be able to be meditative, but also to be able to interact with the world. We have our seated meditations that elicit different responses in our brain. And then we have other meditations like yoga. Yoga is meditation and movement, or it can be. And that's a powerful form as well that I practice daily. So it's about finding different ways to get you into the present moment and allow you to become more aware. So you're almost becoming aware that you are aware, if that makes sense.
And when you say walking meditation, are you walking and reciting a mantra, or just reciting and trying to have this idea of awareness, sort of like you've mentioned? What exactly does that look like?
When I do my walking meditations, sometimes I will do a one-word affirmation because it helps to draw and focus the mind. Or otherwise, I will be in a small space in the park, so maybe like 20 or 30 yards, and I will just walk back and forth really slow, very aware of every single step, very aware of where I am, my breath. So just a very strong mindfulness.
I like that. Thank you. Yeah, no, I know, because I think people hear that idea of walking meditation. It's like, oh, I want to do that. But it's not often very broken down exactly what that looks like. So thank you for sharing that. If there's one thing you'd really urge Savannah listeners to do in terms of this mind, gut, well-being, and, keeping the microbiome happy and healthy, what is it? Is it really just what you've been saying, like the prebiotic foods and the meditation? Is there something else, like one nugget that we should all start doing tomorrow? Maybe it's the apple cider vinegar. I don't know.
I would absolutely recommend even starting today. The day is still young. I would say yes, meditate, and yes, something fermented. So a prebiotic and probiotic. Those two things are going to shift you dramatically, and you will notice a difference in your mindset very quickly.
And if someone's having a lot of negative thoughts, they should really be conscious that that's affecting their physical body. And science has proven that. So,
oh, absolutely. Yes.
Because I think people would not take a razor blade and cut themselves, hopefully, but we often very, very frequently think negative things about ourselves, right? Like, I'm not good enough, or even if it's sort of subconscious low level stuff. So with your saying the science behind it, it really is detrimental to your body to think those negative frequency thoughts. Is that true?
That is absolutely true. And yes, we are our worst, we're our own worst critic, and we have a lot that we sabotage ourselves. And a lot of it is subconscious or just really not that aware, which is something that you can do. You can spend a day just watching your thoughts to see if most of them are positive or negative. And because we have over 60,000 thoughts a day, and 95% of them are the same as yesterday. So you have a certain kind of theme that runs through your state of mind all the time. And what I would suggest is that's why we do the meditation, because it allows us to break that. And when you start to get yourself in a cycle of negativity or thoughts, I need you to interrupt it. I don't care if you stop and give me a few push-ups, do a few burpees, whatever it means for you to interrupt that neural circuitry.
I love it. Just stop and do your burpees. And I've done that too. I love the idea you gave everyone of writing whatever you're thinking down, just taking a stock every hour or something and just getting curious, because it can really be shocking when you track your thoughts, how much just gunk is in there that you don't want to have in there. Great. Well, Teri, thank you so much. Where should people go if they want to connect more with you on this specific topic, this connection between gut and brain?
Sure. They can just go straight to my website at terimosey.com, and they can reach out to me there, or they'll also see other tags there for online courses or my blog, and they can get more information.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. And Teri's also going to be with us in a future episode all about hormone balancing. So you definitely don't want to miss that. And I'd say get some kimchi or get some red onion or garlic and eat those things today. Make sure to keep track of your thoughts. And those are my big tips exiting this episode. Savannah family, thank you so much for being here, for listening, and for all the love you give the show. From my heart to yours, namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaeast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.